I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. Molly's voice carried a practiced calmness as she set her wine glass down and met my gaze across the dinner table. "Billy, I need to tell you something," she said, her tone carefully neutral, as if she were discussing the weather. My stomach tightened. That tone always meant something significant, and rarely something good. I nodded, masking my unease with a polite smile. "Go on." She hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About myself. Here it comes," I thought. "I love you, Billy. I always will. But I've realized I need some space to explore who I am outside of this marriage." Her words hit like a sucker punch. For a moment, I just stared at her, the clinking of cutlery from the surrounding tables blending into a surreal background noise. She said it with such composure, as if asking for a weekend fling was no different than requesting a new flavor of coffee. I leaned back, my heart pounding. "Explore who you are." I echoed, my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside. "What does that mean, Molly?" She sighed, her eyes darting away for a fraction of a second, a tell she didn't even know she had. "It means I need a weekend away. Just me, no responsibilities, no expectations. Time to figure things out." I studied her face, noting the slight blush rising in her cheeks, the way she gripped her wine glass a bit too tightly. She was nervous, but not remorseful. That told me everything I needed to know. "And this weekend," I asked slowly, "will you be alone?" Her blush deepened, but she held her ground. "That's not the point, Billy. I'm asking for your understanding, for your support. This will help us, I promise." Support? Understanding? I wanted to laugh, but I knew better. She expected me to nod like a fool and accept this betrayal masquerading as self-discovery. For years, Molly had been the center of my world. I had overlooked the growing distance between us, chalked it up to busy schedules and life's usual pressures. But now, her words stripped away the thin veneer of normalcy I'd been clinging to. Still, I didn't lash out. That wasn't my way. I'd learned early in life that words wielded carefully could cut deeper than any blade. So, I nodded, my expression neutral. "If that's what you need, Molly." Her shoulders relaxed, and she smiled faintly. "Thank you, Billy. I knew you'd understand." Oh, I understood perfectly. What Molly didn't know was that I had been watching her for months, noting the inconsistencies in her stories, the way she guarded her phone like it held state secrets. I had my suspicions about Nick, her charming younger colleague. I had seen the way her eyes lit up when she mentioned him, once, before she abruptly stopped talking about him altogether. I hadn't acted on my suspicions right away. I'm not a man prone to paranoia or rash decisions. But I wasn't blind either. A few quiet inquiries and some well-placed observations had confirmed what my gut already knew. Molly and Nick were more than colleagues. Their stolen glances, her late-night texts, and a receipt for dinner at an upscale restaurant she had claimed was a work outing, painted a clear picture. I hadn't confronted her then. I wanted to be sure, and more importantly, I wanted to be prepared. The truth was painful, yes, but it also gave me clarity. And now, as she sat across from me, spinning her rehearsed speech, I felt no need to argue or plead. I had already decided how this would end. The next few days passed in a haze of polite indifference. Molly went about her preparations for the weekend with an air of casual excitement, as if she were packing for a spa retreat. I played my part well, even helping her load her suitcase into the car on Friday morning. "Enjoy your weekend," I said as she kissed me on the cheek. She hesitated, perhaps sensing something in my tone, but then she smiled and drove off without a backward glance. I watched her car disappear down the street before turning back to the house. It was time to put my plan into motion. First, I called the locksmith. By the time Molly returned, she wouldn't recognize the place. Then I went through our joint accounts, flagging any suspicious transactions and transferring the bulk of our savings to a separate account in my name. I wasn't about to let her weekend escapades jeopardize my financial security. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. Anger had no place here. This was about reclaiming control, about drawing a line that could not be crossed. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built. It hurt to see it crumble, but I wasn't going to let her destroy me in the process. By the time I sat down with a cold beer that evening, the house felt different. Cleaner, emptier. Molly's belongings were packed neatly in boxes in the garage, labeled with her name and the words, "Future Regrets." I had even added a note on top of the boxes, "Hope it was worth it." As I sipped my beer, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Molly had made her choice, and now I had made mine. The weekend wasn't just a test of her commitment, it was a turning point for me. For too long, I had let her whims dictate the terms of our marriage. No more. When Molly called on Sunday evening, her voice was tense. "Billy, I'm heading home. I hope we can talk." "We will," I said, my tone neutral. "See you soon." She had no idea what awaited her. I spent the rest of Sunday preparing for Molly's return. Not in the way a dutiful husband might, with flowers and dinner waiting, but with a cold sense of finality. Every trace of her existence in the house was boxed up, ready for her to take away. The locksmith had done a stellar job, the new locks were in place, and I felt an odd sense of satisfaction when I turned the key, knowing that the person who once shared this home was now an outsider. By mid-afternoon, I sat in the living room, my phone in hand. It buzzed with notifications, emails, messages, work reminders. But the one that caught my attention was from my lawyer. Everything was set. The divorce papers were ready to file, and Molly would be served at work first thing Monday morning. I stared at the email for a long moment before closing it. I wasn't doing this out of spite. Molly had made her choice, I was merely responding to it. She wanted freedom. I'd give her all the freedom she could handle. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the room, my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen, a familiar blend of comfort and pain that now felt foreign. I hesitated before answering. "Billy?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain. "Yes, Molly." I kept my tone neutral. "I'm heading back now. I should be home in a couple of hours." "All right," I replied simply. There was a pause, as though she expected me to say more. When I didn't, she added, "We'll talk when I get there, okay?" "Sure," I said, and ended the call. I stood in the quiet house, looking around at what had once been our shared space. The framed photos were still on the walls, the knickknacks we'd collected over the years still on the shelves. But they felt like relics of a life that no longer belonged to me. I thought about taking them down, but decided against it. Let Molly see them. Let her remember what she was walking away from. The headlights swept across the driveway a little after 8. I watched from the window as her car pulled in, and for a moment, I considered stepping outside to meet her. But no, I wanted her to come in, to see the changes for herself. The sound of the doorknob rattling filled the air, followed by a muted curse as she realized her key no longer worked. She knocked then, sharp and impatient. I took my time, savoring the moment before opening the door. Molly stood there, suitcase in hand, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as she saw me. "Billy, what's going on? Why can't I get in?" "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She dragged her suitcase across the threshold, her eyes darting around the entryway. "Why are there boxes in the garage?" she asked, her voice rising. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "Because those are your things." She froze, her hand tightening on the suitcase handle. "What?" "You wanted a weekend to explore yourself, Molly," I said, keeping my tone calm. I decided to give you more than just a weekend. Consider this the beginning of your new life." Her face drained of color. "What are you talking about? You're overreacting. We need to talk about this." "Talk?" I chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "You mean like the way you talked to Nick?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. What do you mean?" I pushed off the door and stepped closer, my gaze steady. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Molly? That I haven't noticed the late nights, the constant texting, the way you light up whenever his name comes up? I don't know what you're—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Don't insult me with lies. I know everything, Molly. The dinners, the hotel rooms, the work trips. I even know about the bracelet you bought him. Nice touch, by the way." She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away, her shoulders slumping. "Billy, Save it," I said, cutting her off again. "You made your choice. You wanted freedom, and now you've got it." "Billy, please, just listen," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't like that. I was confused. It was a mistake." "Mistakes happen once," I replied coldly. "This was a series of choices, Molly. And I'm done paying for them." She stepped forward, reaching for me, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No. Don't. There's nothing left to say." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I love you." I laughed bitterly. "Do you? Because your actions tell a very different story." She stood there, trembling, the reality of the situation sinking in. "So what now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." I gestured toward the boxes in the garage. "Now you take your things and go. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow. I'll keep the house, and you can start fresh. Isn't that what you wanted?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Billy, please. Don't do this. Let me fix this." "You can't fix what you've already broken," I said, my voice steady. "Goodbye, Molly." She looked at me for a long moment, as though hoping I'd change my mind. But I didn't. I watched as she turned and walked out the door, her suitcase rolling behind her. When the car pulled away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. The house was quiet again, and for the first time in years, it felt like mine. I sat back down in the living room, staring at the empty driveway, and allowed myself a moment to breathe. The hardest part was over. The silence that followed Molly's departure was deafening. The house, once filled with laughter, arguments, and the mundane chatter of a shared life, now seemed too large, too empty. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel suffocated by it. It was a clean slate, a chance to rebuild without the weight of betrayal dragging me down. The next morning, I woke early, my body and mind unusually alert. There was no lingering heaviness, no temptation to stay in bed and wallow. Instead, I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat on the back patio, letting the crisp morning air fill my lungs. I'd always enjoyed this spot, the view of the garden Molly and I had planted together, the distant hum of the neighborhood waking up. But today, it felt different. It wasn't ours anymore. It was mine. The day unfolded with methodical precision. I finalized the paperwork for the divorce with my lawyer and confirmed the time for Molly to be served. I made calls to cancel our joint credit cards, updated the mortgage and utilities to reflect only my name, and even reached out to a moving company to offer a free pickup for the boxes she'd left behind. Molly had called and texted several times the night before, but I ignored them. There was nothing left to say. By early afternoon, I'd checked every box on my list. The weight of responsibility lifted slightly, and I found myself staring at the garden again. For years, I'd let it grow wild, too busy with work and too distracted by a failing marriage to care for it properly. Now, as I surveyed the overgrown bushes and tangled vines, I felt a sudden urge to dig in. Grabbing a pair of gloves and pruning shears from the garage, I started working. The repetitive motion of cutting, pulling, and clearing was oddly therapeutic. Sweat trickled down my back, and the ache in my arms reminded me that I was alive, capable of change. As I worked, I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The years of subtle neglect, the warning signs I'd ignored, the lies I'd convinced myself to believe. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, the garden looked vastly different. The weeds were gone, the bushes trimmed, and the flowers that had managed to survive now stood proudly in the open air. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I stood back, surveying my work with a small sense of pride. The satisfaction was short-lived, though, as my phone buzzed on the patio table. It was Molly again. This time, she left a voicemail. Against my better judgment, I played it. "Billy, it's me. I know you're angry, and I don't blame you. I made mistakes, horrible mistakes, but you have to believe me when I say I never stopped loving you. Please, can we talk? I can't. I can't do this without you. Just call me back. Please." Her voice cracked at the end, a sob breaking through. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, the years of shared history tugging at my resolve. But then I remembered the late nights, the lies, the look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. That guilt dissolved into something colder, something resolute. I deleted the message. That evening, I treated myself to a simple dinner, steak, potatoes, and a cold beer. The meal tasted better than anything I'd had in months, maybe years. It wasn't about the food itself but the freedom that came with it. No compromises, no tension simmering beneath the surface. Just me and the quiet. As I settled into bed, exhaustion finally hit. My body ached from the day's work, but my mind was clear. Sleep came quickly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it was dreamless and deep. The next few days followed a similar rhythm. I threw myself into projects around the house, channeling the anger and sadness into something tangible. I replaced the squeaky cabinet hinges Molly had always complained about but never fixed, repainted the walls in the living room a bold shade of navy she'd hated, and even started assembling the plans for a deck I'd long wanted to build. Friends and family began to call as word of the divorce spread. Most expressed surprise. A few, who had seen the cracks in our marriage long before I had, offered quiet support. My best friend, Mike, came over one evening with a six-pack and a pizza, settling into the couch like he belonged there. "Man," he said after his third beer, "I can't believe she had the nerve to ask for a self-discovery weekend. What even is that?" I laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh that caught me off guard. "Apparently, it's code for hooking up with your coworker." Mike shook his head. "You're handling this way better than I would. I'd have lost my mind." I came close, I admitted. "But what's the point? She made her choice. I'm making mine." He clinked his bottle against mine. "To new beginnings, then." "To new beginnings," I echoed. 1 week after Molly had left, I received a text from her. It was short and to the point. "Can we meet? Just once. I need to explain." I stared at the screen, debating whether to reply. Part of me wanted closure, to hear her admit to everything and confirm what I already knew. But another part, the part that had worked so hard to move forward, knew that meeting her would only reopen old wounds. In the end, I typed back a single word: "No." Her reply came almost immediately: "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The days stretched into weeks, and life gradually settled into a new rhythm. The house, now fully mine, became a reflection of the man I was becoming, stronger, more independent, and free of the suffocating weight of Molly's betrayal. The garden I had restored bloomed with vibrant colors, and the navy blue walls in the living room made the space feel bold and alive. But healing is rarely linear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the neighborhood grew quiet, I found myself standing in the garden, staring at the flowers I had so painstakingly nurtured. Something about the twilight, the fading light, the coolness in the air, stirred an ache in my chest. I missed her. It wasn't the Molly who had lied, who had betrayed me. I missed the Molly who would laugh with me until our sides hurt, who would hum quietly while making coffee, who once dreamed with me about growing old together. Those memories, untainted by her infidelity, still held a piece of my heart captive. I shook off the feeling and went inside, locking the door behind me. The evening passed uneventfully until my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Billy, it's urgent. Please call me back. Nick." Nick? The name hit like a slap. What could he possibly want? Against my better judgment, I dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. "Billy," he said, his voice shaky. "It's Molly." "What about Molly?" I asked sharply. She's in the hospital." "It's bad." For a moment, the world tilted. "What happened?" "An accident." "Look, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but she needs you." I hung up without responding and sat down, my mind racing. Every rational part of me screamed not to go, that this wasn't my responsibility anymore. But something deeper, something I couldn't quite explain, urged me forward. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. The nurse at the front desk directed me to the ICU, where Nick sat slumped in a plastic chair. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. I hated him, but even I could see he was barely holding it together. "What happened?" I asked, my voice cold. He looked up, startled. She was drinking. We had a fight, and she stormed out. I didn't know she'd get behind the wheel." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "And now you want me here? After everything?" "She asked for you," he said, his voice breaking. "Before they sedated her." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past him and into the room. Molly lay in the hospital bed, pale and fragile, a web of tubes and wires keeping her tethered to life. Her face, though bruised, was unmistakably hers. My heart clenched at the sight of her, and I hated myself for the wave of emotion that surged through me. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy and unfocused. When they landed on me, a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Billy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I swallowed hard. "I'm here." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "For everything." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I forgave her. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for her hand, holding it gently. Her skin was cold, her grip weak. "I didn't deserve you," she said, her voice fading. "I know that now." I squeezed her hand, my own tears threatening to fall. "Molly, don't." "I still love you," she interrupted, her eyes locking onto mine. I never stopped. Her breathing grew shallow, the beeping of the machines quickening. A nurse rushed in, followed by a doctor, but I barely noticed them. All I could see was Molly, her eyes heavy with regret and something else, peace. The doctor spoke to me, his voice distant and clinical. "She's gone." I stood there, frozen, as the reality sank in. Molly was gone. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, was gone. The days that followed were a blur. The funeral was small, attended by a few close friends and family. Nick didn't show, and I didn't care. As I stood by her grave, the weight of everything we had shared, good and bad, pressed down on me. The anger I had carried for so long melted away, replaced by an aching sadness. Molly had been flawed, as we all are, but she had been mine once. And now, she was gone forever. Months later, as spring turned to summer, the garden bloomed again. I spent more time out there, tending to the flowers Molly had once admired. Life went on, but her absence lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the love we had lost and the mistakes that had torn us apart. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, staring at the vibrant colors of the flowers. In my pocket was a photo of us from years ago, young, happy, and in love. I pulled it out, tracing her face with my thumb. "I still love you too," I whispered to the fading light. And for the first time since she'd left, I let the tears fall.